Okay, so what light has to do with BlinkenCity and Blinkenlight. Did you ever heard of Blinkenlight, by the way?
I think I heard of it, yeah. Wasn't it about these lights on buildings, right?
Yes, it was an art installation back in, I think, 2001 in Berlin on the Alexanderplatz. And basically it was about, let's say, putting single pixels on a building scale and you can play Pong on it. But it's not only regarding lights and controlling lights. This talk is from Fabian and Luca also on blackouts and controlling these, and what to do with SDR, what to do with traffic lights, and how to prevent potential blackouts and the power system behind that. This is now your topic. Please welcome, with a warm applause, Fabian and Luca.
Thanks for the introduction. Thank you all for coming and the awesome Laola here in the beginning. This is Luca, I'm Fabian, and we are both quite excited to present this research now for the first time. But before that, we need to start with a disclaimer. This talk is for educational purposes only and to warn of the risks that we identified. We follow the responsible disclosure process, and most importantly, we do not encourage, endorse, or support the abuse of any of the vulnerabilities we discussed and or creating a blackout. And with that out of the way, let's start this talk where the research journey also began for us, with a broken street lamp in Berlin. One of the street lamps was missing the cover on its pole, so we could peek inside, and we found this box which had a relay and it said Funk-Rundsteuerung. Also, each of those poles had another ominous box on the top. Turned out, we found a radio-controlled switch, and the antenna was actually externally mounted up in this other box here. Naturally, we got curious, and we found that this system is operated by a single company called EFR. That's short for Europäische Funk-Rundsteuerung, and it consists of 3 transmitting stations, 2 of them in Germany, that send high-power, low-frequency signals as so-called telegrams over the protocols Versacom and Semagir, which we will cover today, to devices in Austria, Czechia, Germany, Hungary and Slovakia. And the system works like that. There are around 300 clients, which are energy companies, which we will call EVU for short, which use either a web-based, internet-exposed application or a VPN-based desktop application to trigger the sending of commands to their receivers. Those are then forwarded to one of those transmitting stations and broadcasted to the radio ripple control receivers, which we will call FRE. They can then either switch simple relays or actually run more complex programs. And when one of those relays is switched, this would either connect or disconnect a supply or a load to or from the grid. Also, just by the way, those multiple relays are usually not used for connecting multiple devices, but for a kind of dimming functionality. And we also found that this system has an arguably much more important role than controlling street lamps only. And that is as part of the so-called redispatch 2.0. It's used to counteract regional imbalances within Germany to keep the grid stable. And for that, it is used to control renewable power plants like solar, wind, and biogas, and also different loads like heat pumps or wall boxes. It's also used for switching between the day and night tariff or for controlling custom devices like industrial freezers. And the same frequencies are also used for a proprietary weather forecast called Meteo Time 2, as well as normal and some encrypted time information. Digging just a little bit deeper, we found some company slides that show like many of the big names in energy as their clients, and also an ever-growing number of deployed devices, with over 1.6 million being the last number that we found. Also, in one of the slide decks, they actually mention numbers for some of the example customers. And those add up to multiple gigawatts of loads and supply. And with those massive numbers in mind and major blackouts already having happened in the US and reports of growing instabilities in the EU grid, and the current hybrid warfare strategies with just another undersea power cable being cut a few days ago, we wanted to investigate how likely could this system be abused to cause a power outage. But before things get too serious, let's go back to the street lamp, because our initial motivation was actually much more benign. We were inspired by the awesome project Blinkenlights, and were just thinking, could this idea be scaled up? Could we use a full city as our screen and maybe play a game on it? We imagined something like that. Okay. But how doomed are we really, Luca?
All right. So the first thing we thought is we need to learn how this protocol works, right? And the very first thing that came to our mind was we need to capture what is going on the radio. And how would you do so? Well, there are at least 3 ways to do so. And at the beginning, we were not thinking we would do it with an SDR, even if it's possible, but we thought, okay, let's buy a device. Let's buy one of these devices. We found it used on eBay, so we bought it. And then we looked at how it works, and there are some cables that go from the antenna that is external into the device. We were tapping into these lines, and we saw that there were already the bits, the decoded bits, right? So, okay, we got the bits. If you are more into the SDR world, you could use an online SDR service, like there are these community-based SDR things, like the one you see in the middle, where you can basically pick a receiver in any country in the world, and then you can listen to the frequency in that country. So that's an option. And the third option would be to run your own SDR. And just to be sure you're on the right frequency, here is how it sounds. All right, so it sounds a bit like a modem. In fact, it's an FSK modulation. And, well, the parameters are written in the slide. You can try your own, or you can buy a device like we did, and then you start to have the bits. So what did we do? We started collecting these radio messages that are transmitted and received by our receiver. And, well, as soon as the screen is back, you will see how it looks like. Maybe. Yes. Oh, okay, great. So what you see there in the middle is a bunch of these messages. The first thing you can note is that there is a common header. All of them start with 68. Then there is a length. Then there is another 68. And then there are other fields. There is a control field with a sequence number. There is some other value that we don't understand yet. And then there is in orange an address, 16-bit address, so pretty short, but still works. And then what is in blue is the payload. Okay, we were interested to understand what is this payload, how does it work? Looking at the first message, we see that has a different address, there is a 0. And also this type of message is sent every 10 seconds, very regularly. So we thought, okay, there must be something for synchronization or something about timing. We don't know. We will see that in the next slide. And looking at the other ones, we see that the length of the message is variable. And some of them even look like encrypted. The entropy of the message was very high. All right, so let's start from the first one. As I said, there is an address 0, and we understand that 0 means every receiver will take this message, parse it, and do something with it. And we logged the time when we received this message, and then we looked at the bytes. And the bytes are changing very slightly. Some bits are flipped, basically, or some are incremented there. So it was clear that probably the time was carried into this message. So we went through and capturing more of these, we found out that yes, definitely it was seconds, minutes, hours, and everything was there. Okay. So you see that the time is sent unencrypted. There is no integrity protection. There is no replay protection. What comes to your mind? Well, if you're a security researcher, the first thing you think is to replay these messages or change this message and send them altered to a receiver. And so we thought, okay, so if you can change the time or replay an old time, how would a device cope with this? Would it change the time that is stored on the device? And well, probably yes. And I mean, there are some devices that probably rely on time, right? So especially if you think of streetlights, they need to turn on at a certain time of the day and turn off at a certain time of the day. And this is implemented with some programmed calendar. So, you know, every day, every month, they have a different time to switch on and off. They are also controlled manually by cities, so they can manually trigger that. And we thought, that looks interesting. And since we are a little bit nostalgic, we were thinking of the lights, you know, a century ago. They were turned on by a guy. A profession was the lamp lighter, and the guy would go with a stick and turn on the lights. And well, if you have some imagination, you can imagine how this would look like today. There's a stick there. And the light goes on. Okay, so this seemed interesting, but we don't know much about this protocol, and there are plenty of other messages we need to study. So at that point, we decided to build a full playground with all sorts of devices. We bought different vendors, different protocols, and at that point, we thought, okay, but we need something to, you know, to send a message to these devices, so we implemented an emulator of the real network transmitter thing. And so we took an ESP, something we had in the lab, some waveform generator. We built up with a coil. We took out of a mobile phone charger. We tuned it with some capacitors, and we tuned it to the right frequency. And with these elements, now we have a lab where we can, you know, receive and send messages. Great. But what are we sending? And well, to learn what are we sending, we need to perhaps look into a manual or some documentation. And well, we did some research, and it actually starts pretty early in the last century. The protocol that is being used today in English is called radio ripple control, and the base version of this was ripple control. Ripple control was a technology invented really 100 years ago, where you inject a small tone in a power line, and then a receiver will listen for that tone and then do something when that tone is played. And when the radio was invented, then they decided, or rather, it was too expensive to continue using power line, and somebody thought, okay, why don't we use radio waves? And while doing so, they didn't change much. So the protocol is basically the same, like the one in 1900, but they added some functions to make it smarter. And if you want to look at this, there are some DIN standards. They are sold on a DIN website, and there are some other ones that are still draft. But if you are nice and you call VDE and you say, okay, I want to do something, they might sell it to you. So we got the standards, and we got this information, and we started to look into that. The first one is called Versacom. The second one is called Semagear. We will start now with Versacom.
Yes. So Versacom is a little bit more modern and easier to understand protocol. After the EVU address, which is part of the outer telegram structure, Versacom uses a 4-bit function specifier, then a 4-bit address mode specifier, followed by the function arguments and the actual address specification. The functions are defined in the DIN norm and range from simple and cyclic on-off switching to vendor-specific commands or deactivation of the receiver. The addressing is a little bit more complicated and allows to target a group of devices based on using a combination of A, B, C, and D address levels. And if none of those are used, then it's a single addressing mode, targeting only one specific receiver. So let's look into that a little bit more to understand how we can control a device that we have in front of us now. Here are 2 telegrams, the first one using the A and B address modes, the second one using the C address mode as well. So the second telegram here is targeting a smaller, more specific number of devices. Group A addressing level consists out of 6 bits, which can be set either to 1 or 0, specifying if devices that are parameterized to be like of that A address level should be switched or not. Group B, C, and D address levels are then also like variable length, with the group B being specified in the last 2 bits of the group A, and then C and D is just implicit based on the remaining bytes. So quite complicated. And also if C and D is used in combination, then they form a kind of matrix, which we'll see again in the next slide. because we wanted to know how is this actually used in real life. And we found actually some quite extensive information about that from various energy companies that showed that address level A and B are usually used for specifying the energy type and the power class. So for example, 1.1, in this case here on the top left, would target wind parks with more than 10 megawatts of power. The C and D address levels are used in combination for regional targeting, where one German zip code is just associated with one of those matrix cells. We also found EVU addresses in there. They're called Anwenderadresse, as well as the definition of the stimming feature, so the association of relay to output power level. But besides, in those PDFs, we also could extract EVU addresses from recorded telegrams, of course. And also we stumbled upon an internet-facing customer portal that was like by EFR that was leaking a lot of extensive information, including sent telegrams and a full list of EVU addresses to any unauthenticated user via WebSocket. But this leak has been fixed, and but it's also not required for this attack to work. So now let's combine our now around 300 EVU addresses that we collected and our information or knowledge about how the addressing mode works to target the device in front of us, or actually to switch off all Versacom-based devices that are in range. And for that, we simply will use a telegram that uses only the A-level addressing, and then set all of the 6 bits to 1. And that means that all of the devices that have a matching EVU will be targeted by this command. If the command is a switch off, and we cycle through the 300 or even all the possible 65,000 possibilities for EVU addresses, then we should be able to switch off the device in front of us, and also by seeing when it reacted, we can find out which EVU it was actually configured with. And with that, you can actually disconnect a real photovoltaic system from the grid. So here on the left, you can see an LED indicating that currently power is being delivered into the grid. Here on the bottom, you can see it's around 2.5 kilowatts of power being transmitted. So here on the left, you can see an LED indicating that currently power is being delivered into the grid. Here on the bottom, you can see that around 2.5 kilowatt of power is being transmitted. And here on the right, the relays are on the top position, all being on. Now, somebody is starting an attack. And you should also maybe hear in just a second. The relays are turned off, the power goes down to 0 watts, and no power anymore delivered. Thank you. Some of you might now have wondered probably, wait, just with a flipper 0? So initially, we just were looking for a way that allows us to select the payload and see the state of the attack, and we thought the flipper 0 with its SDK for app development seems like a good fit. Only then we found out that we can misuse the RFID antenna, the 125 kilohertz one, and the RFID read functionality to then in software create an FSK modulated signal, also at 139 kilohertz, and with a reach of up to 1 meter. And what this means is that with just a little bit of magic, your flipper 0 can become a streetlight begun.
Okay, so that was the closing slide for Versacom. We basically owned it. And now we need to look into the second one. The second one, well, we started the same way. The clicker doesn't work. So we open the standards, and we see that it looks a little bit different. There is some complexity. They describe how the payload can be split in multiple telegrams, and there is a sequence, there is some headers, some CRC, and then some zero padding. And we thought, okay, let's try to see where those messages are sent over the radio. So you can look into the middle of those bytes, and you can see there are some zero padding ones. Then there is the green part. Those are 3 telegrams that also end with a zero padding, and then something else. And we thought, okay, this seems to match. There is a start, there is an end. Okay, great. But if you try to match that with the structure that we said there with the bits, that doesn't really match. And another problem arises there, that this is only sent every 6 hours. And we thought, how can they control solar plants every 6 hours? That doesn't work. It cannot be the one. And if you look around also, you see the other messages in blue, those are encrypted. And we thought, okay, encrypted every 6 hours, this seems to be the meteor time. So those are the weather forecasts being delivered every 6 hours. But this is out of scope for our presentation. So we know that there is something else, and we want to know where the actual semagear messages are transmitted. And while we don't know where they are, certainly the device knows where they are because they need to be parsed and used. So let's look at the device. Opening the device, we found 2 different architectures. One was based on a Motorola chip. This is pretty old, but even being old, it had some security bytes to protect code readout. 8 bytes, it was a bit too long. And in this case, the chip doesn't have a flash, so the flash is external. That sounds quite interesting. So we will look into that later. And the second model had a more modern PIC. This one had no flash external, so it's internal. But from some sources, we found out that there is a bug in this chip. So if you have some luck and the bits in the security bits are set correctly, you can actually read out the firmware. All right, so we had some information, and we proceeded with the standard hardware reverse engineering. So we plugged some cables here and there. We plugged our oscilloscope, and we looked at the signals. They looked great. There was some SPI, some I2C, some serial. And after we found which points we want to probe, then we connected the logic analyzer. With that, we let the device reboot, and we observe what it does. We also tried to send some message, and we saw when does it do anything after receiving a message. And well enough, we found that when the EVU is correct, then the device reads something from flash. Those bytes that it reads are 3 bytes, the one you see down below, and you might know that the device has an address, a unique address, and there's exactly 24 bits. So what we saw there was exactly the individual address of this device. That is what we need to trigger individually the street lamps that you might remember from the beginning. So we have the individual address, but we still don't know how to trigger the commands, right? So we need to still study how the protocol works. And okay, so maybe we can gather some information from the second type of device. In this case, we saw there is a bug. It's a hardware bug. If the device is configured correctly, you can actually read out the memory, but you need 2 devices from the same type, same firmware. Why that? Because you need to override the bootloader and then try to dump the memory of the rest and then override the rest and then, that thing. This seemed to be possible, but we didn't have the programming device. And also we thought, okay, let's see if there is a firmware tool for decompiling this, and IDA does not support this architecture. So we thought, okay, it starts to be a bit hard. And then considering we don't have the right hardware to debug this device, we thought, okay, this will really take too long. Isn't there anything else we can do, something easier we can do to get to know what the device is doing? And looking around, we found that every device, every vendor has an infrared port. This infrared port is quite similar to the one that you might have seen in smart meters. In fact, in the data sheet of one of these devices, it mentions this IX standard that is the same using smart meters. So we found some open source tools. We tried to speak to this device with this USB adapter, and nothing. 0. Nothing came out. Then we Googled a bit, and we found that there are custom tools to program these devices. In practice, technicians, when they mount this on the wall, they need to parameterize the device, and they use these tools. Okay, so we look into the vendor website, and there was nothing, no place to download these tools. And we thought, okay, but we are smart, let's try fuzzing and see what we can get. So we started fuzzing. different speeds, different bytes, everything, and we got some little thing back that sounded more like an error than anything meaningful. And we thought, okay, this would take, again, very long. And we thought, okay, let's spend another half an hour on the internet, maybe we can find something. And yes, we found the programming tool that technicians should use. This tool, once you plug it with the infrared port, can read a device ID, can read the full EEPROM, and can read some programs, can read a lot of things. What you see on the right is some configuration that was pre-stored on the tool, and this configuration includes commands, programs, things we don't understand yet. So you see numbers, there is on, off, there is an address, you see plus and minuses, so the address is plus and minuses, something was a bit weird. And we thought, okay, we need some help. We need some help, and you click F1 and you get the Windows help. And from the Windows help of the program, you can find very good information. Finally, a help function that works. And okay, so we finally learned how the plus and minus things work, how the programs and commands are supposed to be used. And additionally, this tool had an advanced feature where you can type a hex string and it will decode it and tell you what command is that. So you can imagine we tried to paste everything we found on the radio until we found something that was decoding. And that means at that point, we found out that command starts in a certain way, with the letter E, for example, and then we know, okay, it's meaning something, okay? Additionally, we wanted to document ourselves, so we bought some old books from 1993. This was written by the actual author of the protocol, and then we found also some other patents that describe how some functionality of the protocol works. Great, now we have a lot of knowledge. What do? Well, we go back to the bytes. And this time, we know which telegrams we need to look for, and we start to look at which function is implemented by which telegram. The more interesting one seemed to be this direct command that starts with E. And there is a bit of complication in Semagear because you can concatenate multiple things in the same telegram. In the second one, for example, you see it starts with 9. That means individual addressing. Then there are the 24 bits of the device, and then there is the actual command that starts with E later. This was actually not documented in the standard. We found out because the tool was describing this behavior. Now, looking at the green part, you see that there are some bits set, but mostly zeros. And, well, from what we learned from the help program, we know that there is some address and there are some program arguments. But we still don't know what a program does because we could not actually read it out. And so what do we do? Well, again, a bit of, let's say, work on the bytes, and we collected all the messages for a certain EVU, and then we look how the program bytes or bits are changing or not changing, and we found that very few bits are used. And that's the program address, the one that is marked in yellow, and the other part is the program argument. And we don't know what those bits do, right? So we know that there are some programs, let's say 3 or 4, and we know that you can set some bits and they might do something. In this RPT01 tool, we could see some program templates. And the program templates can be very complex, like the one you see on the middle. There are some if statements that are nested with each other. It reads from flash. It can set relays, multiple relays at the same time. And we thought, okay, how do we find out? But we also saw that there are some simple programs. These simple programs basically look at the specific bits that you are sending, and if it's the right bit, it sets a certain relay. That sounds great, because in the end, what we want to do is control specific relays of these devices. So you can imagine we really like fuzzing, so we started fuzzing again. And by fuzzing, we wanted to trigger, we wanted to find which programs exist and which relays are triggered by this. So we set up some electrical cables, we let the thing run, and as you can see, this was our Christmas lights in the office for a while. And once we succeeded, we got a list of program addresses, and we got the bits that are needed to set each relay. And here we are with another attack. This attack also was inspired by the fact that we found some screenshots. What you see there is a testing tool. So technicians can go on site and want to test, for example, the relay of a device, and they need to emulate the radio. So they plug this device, this cable that sends some telegrams that are emulating the radio ones, and they can trigger individually every relay. And because of this, we knew that there are test programs in each device, or there should be, so that the technician can test each relay. And so, well enough, we have collected all these things. So we have a couple of devices in our lab. I brought you one here. And once you know the right command, you can trigger then the relays. Now, probably you won't believe me, but I will show you very soon. This is the device. I'm not sure if you can see it, but these are the relays. And this is the emulator. So I will make it close. And since you probably cannot see it very well, I thought you might need some LED, something blinking, to see it well. All right, so I'm going to send a couple of messages, and you might recognize the sequence that I'm sending, or not. Okay, it's Morse code and it's CCC. Anyway, so this is the example that we wanted to show you. Of course, we can do the same with a Versacom device. On any SemaGear device, we need to first do the fuzzing, and then we actually can have the commands. But yes, so we can make lights blink.
Okay, so we saw this blinking lights, then let's reconsider the BlinkenCity idea again. Is it possible? So yes, we can control individual street lamps via radio. To then display arbitrary content, we still need to find the correct individual IDs and then map them to the location. The individual IDs can either be extracted again from recordings, where the single addressing mode is used, or can be read out via infrared, and then if one is found, you can try the previous or next one and see which of the lights go out, and then maybe during a bike tour or with a drone, map that to the actual location. However, there's one limitation, and that is that it would be quite low FPS. So we only can update around 2 pixels or full regions per second and center, and also we need a sender that covers the full city. But with those limitations in mind, yes, that's technically possible, but probably would look best as a time lapse. So naturally, the next question was, how many screens do we have in Germany? And we just thought, let's ask the state. Thanks to Frag den Staat for existing and Thomas Blind for performing those requests, some cities actually considered the technology used for controlling their street lamps as sensitive critical infrastructure information. Others responded with more than asked for. So Bielefeld, for example, not only confirmed that it exists and that it uses the radio ripple control technology, but also that they use 2 light sensors at those 2 locations as a kind of master switch. So I think, quite ironically, you can use just 1 or maybe 2 flashlights to turn off the street lamps of a city, of a few cities in Germany. Also, you might wonder, what about here in Hamburg? And there we actually just stumbled upon news from a few months ago that Hamburg is now migrating its street lamps to a new future-proof system. And we were excited and thought, oh, nice, what kind of IoT stuff are they trying out? Turned out, no, they just now migrated to the system that we are just talking about today. So unfortunately, our talk is too late for Hamburg, but if there are other plans, we hope that the system's insecurities can at least be taken into the decision-making process. And also, when it comes to interesting news, also just from a few months ago, we read from a hiccup in Hesse, where a few cities that have FRE-controlled street lamps were completely dark. All the street lamps were out, and people already speculated about a hacking attack. Turned out it was a technical defect, whatever that means exactly, but I just want to use this opportunity to clarify that this was not us, and no street lamps were harmed in the making of this research. Okay, but with that we also need to go back to the more serious topic. Could we create a blackout? And we are not experts in grid stability, but we imagine that 3 conditions need to be met. The amount of power that's controlled via FREs needs to be sufficient to cause serious trouble. The radio protocol or radio signals either need to be overpowered or the original towers need to be hijacked. And the optimal timing has to be chosen. So let's dive into the first one, the power. By manually looking at the top energy providers of Germany and what they use, we estimate that of the ripple control technology, 80% of that power is currently controlled with the new radio-based version. And then let's look into renewable energy plants and laws around that. So for example, solar plants smaller than 30 kilowatts, or now it's actually 25 kilowatts, but it was 30 for the most time. Remote control is optional, but it's demanded by some EVUs. For power plants between 30 and 100 kilowatt, remote control is actually required by law, and it's almost exclusively implemented via ripple control. I think only Berlin in the past was using another technology called Strompager. And then for the bigger ones, like starting from 100 kilowatts, remote control is still required by law, but also a more advanced so-called Fernwirktechnik needs to be installed, which also allows reading out the current production numbers, like it's a two-way communication system. But we were wondering, does that mean that FREs are not in use there anymore? And how about super big solar parks? And we thought, well, it would be super nice to know, but that's critical infrastructure and the heart of it, that will be super hard to find out. And that's what we thought until we stumbled upon this video here on YouTube.
Ja, wir haben 4 Stück von diesen Empfängern. Für jeden Anlagenbereich haben wir eine. Und man kann sich das jetzt circa so vorstellen, dass jeder Rundsteuerempfänger ungefähr roundabout für 20 Megawatt zuständig ist.
So just for your information, this is actually the same model and the same energy provider as the Morse code sending. I'm not sure how this power plant would react to that. And also the system is from 2021, but they are still in use today. And we can say that because from this information, it was quite easy to pinpoint it, even though those 80 megawatts were actually only one part of the system. And that is because it belongs to the currently 3rd largest solar park in Germany with overall 160 megawatt of power. And besides this nice anecdota, we also found many more PDFs from different energy providers that explicitly mention the use of FREs for power plants larger than 100 kilowatt. But what is now the overall number of power being controlled via radio ripple control? And unfortunately, neither EFR nor Bundesnetzagentur has this number, according to their own statement. So we needed to estimate and calculate it ourselves. For that, we downloaded 2 gigabytes of zipped XML files that include information about every single power plant in Germany. We sent some requests to the press departments of various energy providers, and we dug deep into statistics. To estimate the smallest solar class here, we could actually use the remote controllable by network provider flag inside the Marktstammdatenregister XML quite conveniently. The middle class was easier to estimate because of the full ripple control technology usage. And the big power plant estimate is a bit rougher, as there were just not enough YouTube videos for a proper sample size. For the wind estimate, we just used the examples that EFR themselves have actually published and extrapolated those numbers to today, like looking up those numbers. And while we could not confirm that all of them are still using FREs for those today, also those 5 out of 300 companies were likely not the only ones having wind controlled via it. And then for load, we estimate, based on statistics, that around 20 gigawatts of load are controlled with FREs. So overall, that's 60 gigawatts of an imbalance, and that seems quite significant. Also, that's just for Germany and also just for solar and wind. But just how significant is that? And for that, we need to look into the net or grid frequency. It's 50 hertz, and it should always stay there. If it reaches 50.2 hertz or more, then there are interventions to reduce the supply. For example, using this technology that we are talking about today to turn off those solar parks. If the frequency drops below 49.8 hertz, then there are interventions, for example, to activate energy reserves, to disconnect industries that have agreed contractually to that being the case. And also the first hardware might fail, like it has happened in the Vienna airport. If you reach 49 hertz and less, then there is an automated stepwise load shedding happening, up to 50% at 48.5 hertz. That sounds a little bit sober, but what that means is over 200 million people without power. At 47.5 hertz, power plants would just disconnect from the grid to protect themselves from damages. So then the grid really needs to be built up from scratch. And in theory, in a fully loaded grid at 300 gigawatt, to create a 1 hertz change to reach this private load shedding threshold, it requires an imbalance of 18 gigawatts. However, such a big number, or like such a middle big number compared to the 60 gigawatts, has actually never been seen before in the grid. In practice, one of the last incidents was in 2021, when around 3 gigawatts of power were unexpectedly lost in Poland, and the grid frequency dropped by 0.16 hertz. And what I want to say with that is that, the grid basically has not experienced such a big imbalance yet, and if we are talking about something like 18 gigawatts or maybe 60 gigawatts or maybe even more if we consider other countries, then there is an additional problem besides this theoretical effect of the grid frequency. And that is, if a lot of power is missing in one region, then this power needs to be transferred there as well over power lines that might then be overloaded and be shut off, for example, to prevent damage to the power lines, which can then cause other power lines, which would then be overloaded, to shut off again. And then it can cause a domino effect or cascade effect, like it has happened in 2006 already once, after a cruise ship needed to be transported, and then one power line was shut off and things were not properly planned through. And then, like much more can happen than this theoretical limit here can imply. And taking all of that into consideration, it seems like there is enough power to be controlled via radio ripple control to cause serious trouble. Let's see if we can also, like range-wise, can reach this power.
Right, so we said there are 3 conditions. This was the first. The second would be to take over the radio transmissions. And well, there are probably 2 ways. And the first that we thought of was, can you kind of override the signal? Right? So can you send something that would be more powerful than the original one? And since we are not that much experts into low frequency, we asked some experts. They provided some formulas to us. We wrote down a tool that can simulate things. And well, we started with this assumption. You need a very good antenna. An antenna is nothing less than a wire of a certain length that resonates at a certain frequency. So in this case, the frequency is pretty low. You need a 500-meter antenna to be optimal. And, well, that's pretty hard to get, but we will see how we can get there. And then we assumed, okay, let's imagine you have 10 kilowatts. There you can build your own amplifier, and there are also some portable boxes that can give you 10 kilowatts. And, well, with that, if you see, we try to simulate this. On the map on the left, there are some green dots that are pretty invisible. I don't know if you can see it. One is here. And then the red dot would be a ROG transmitter. In this case, if you estimate the distance between the two is 300 kilometers, you can see that the front lobe is about 70 kilometers, so we can overpower the original one for about 70 kilometers, and in the back would be 240 kilometers. And this was only one transmitter, and, well, I guess if you want to do it for the whole country, you would need to place a couple of them. And, well, okay, it's not so easy, but you can still do it if you have enough power and enough transmitters. Now, the topic of the antenna, because it sounds hard to have something 500 meters high. And then we thought, okay, how can we do it? And we took inspiration from radio amateurs. They often use kites and weather balloons and attach a wire and bring it up. And, well, we found that is pretty common, and you can go high up to a kilometer with those, even more. Alternatively, you could also use a drone, but that would have some limited time, flight time. So once we got these numbers, we thought, okay, but how difficult is really this attack to be run? And then we thought, okay, let's try to implement something like that. Of course, not on the real frequency. Yeah, that was a bit of a failure. So in the end, we went to Tempelhoferfeld, and we used a kite.
So here we were limited by the law to only use up to 100 meters of line, and we could also not send more than 1 watt of radiated power, and needed to use a different frequency than the real EFR one, but at least it gave us a feeling on how complicated it is, and it actually worked quite beautifully.
All right, so as you see, we had a bit of fun. And this is, let's say, the approach of an amateur, but we also think that we need to think of real attackers here. And we thought, how would an enemy state do the attack? And I think they would not go with these kites, but they would rather attack the IT infrastructure of the company that runs this service. And well, there are probably, again, 2 possibilities. One is via the internet. And we know that they have portals. Sometimes they have outdated software. Sometimes they have some leaks. So, well, to be taken care of. And the second one would be to go physically to the transmitting sites. And, well, when we went there, we thought it's not that much secure. So it looks like the entrance of a park. And, well, we think that this would be also a valid option if you want to take over the signal.
Okay, so with the range also basically covered, we were inspired by this 32C3 talk, which we can highly recommend if you want to dig deeper, to basically create a naive plan on how such an attack using the FRE control would look like. And for legal reasons, I want to emphasize that these are not illegal instructions, but it's a thought experiment as part of our feasibility study. So first, if you opt for the decentralized center option, you would need to find good sending locations a little bit further away from the original senders with controllable load in range, or supply in range. For that, as an attacker, I would maybe use this public data here and put it into a custom physics simulation. Actually, I would put the full Marktstammdatenregister-based estimate in there, and then maybe play around a little bit with the radiated power to decide on what to aim for, maybe interactively check different sending locations, or maybe even write a computer program to algorithmically optimize this hard problem for you. Then the time actually seems quite simple. There is near real-time public information on that available on the internet. So while this screenshot here was taken in late September, and probably does not show the best day for such an attack, we can see that on a sunny day, still the majority of power is being created from renewables. And then if you think you found the right time, there is another very convenient website called Netzampel, provided by the energy providing companies, which actually shows you how many renewables are currently already turned off to keep the grid stable as part of the Redispatch 2.0. And if a lot of those power plants already needed to be turned off to keep the grid stable, then maybe the attack could actually start with switching all of them on. This would then increase the grid frequency and would cause other power plants, which are not under our control, to reduce our power output. So for example, the old-style coal plants, basically being a kind of amplification attack. If the grid frequency is back to 50 Hertz then, and maybe even time it with a change of hour, where some power plants are being shut off and other are being turned on, and there is a natural dip or peak in the frequency anyway, saving another 2 gigawatts, then you can switch off all the renewables in range and switch on all of the loads, maybe multiple times on-off, time it and sync it with the grid's resonance frequency. And if you really want to make things harder for the incident response team, you can then also deactivate the FREs and continue jamming the frequency. So let's summarize. So while the amount of power that's controlled via FREs is the biggest unknown, with our best effort estimate, the European grid could experience a never-before-seen loss of power. Overpowering the radio control signal would be the biggest obstacle, and like with a decentralized option, it would require a significant coordinated effort. We still think that this is within the realms of state-sponsored attackers, as we have seen like in the past with how much effort they are putting into those actions. But for a state-sponsored attacker, just hijacking the actual transmitter might actually be the more plausible attack vector. Choosing the right timing seems comparably trivial. So overall, we think that this attack scenario actually has the potential to cause a proper blackout via those cascade effects that we have mentioned before, or at least a brownout, being like regional power outages. And even if not, it can and probably would have short-term effects on energy prices, result in a network split, and not increase the trust of the public into the grid stability. But as we've mentioned in the beginning, we are not experts for grid stability. So when we shared this research with Der Spiegel beforehand, they reached out to Professor Dr. Albert Moser, who is university professor at RWTH Aachen, and he comments on that an attack of this magnitude could indeed lead to the first Europe-wide power outage in history. And I can tell you that this is not what we've expected and hoped for when starting with the BlinkenCity idea, but that's just what we ended up with after digging deeper and deeper, maybe also a little bit inspired by some parts of the disclosure process.
Yeah, so as you can see, things got a bit serious, and since we are serious researchers, we started our responsible disclosure, and this started in September. We sent an email to this company and showed the vulnerabilities, and well, we also had a call, and they said, yeah, okay, we knew about that, okay. Well, what they knew is that we then scheduled a meeting, and in the meeting we were explaining more details of our findings. And they said, yes, we knew that the protocol is unencrypted, and so there are some attacks you can play. And apparently this was found by some researchers, from university researchers in 2013. And it even ended up in a book produced by BSI, the German cybersecurity agency. So this was very well documented, and they knew from 2013. In fact, 2015, they had ready an encrypted version of the protocol, but unfortunately, nobody wanted this. Nobody wanted to pay for it. And so it was not deployed. Another thing, when we shared that we found these big power plants using FREs, they said that should not be the case. Okay, so somebody is not doing the right thing there. And then we, of course, disclosed this to BSI, and this was then disclosed to other agencies, and they took it seriously again. They thought of, okay, encryption here, what can we do? And then EFR itself notified their customers that are using these superpower plants, super big ones, with the FRE, that they should change, they should do something else. And after that, we thought, okay, we did a good job. Everything seems to be going the right direction, but apparently EFR decided to contact their lawyers, and they got a bit, let's say, panicked because we said we will present this as CCC. And they said, no, you don't go to CCC, you don't present this. And in fact, quite funnily, the lawyer explicitly said, you can probably read it in German, said, what you're providing literally is illegal instructions. That is the motto of the conference. And they end with, okay, this could cause you some negative consequences. So we thought about that, and then we thought, well, this needs to be public. Because we wanted to be sure that there is a discussion starting now, and several parties will need to be involved. In fact, we were also surprised how EFR was very collaborative, at least at the beginning, and every time we reported something to them, they started to fix it. So it was really a good thing. But suddenly, a couple of hours ago, you probably maybe saw the news, and there was a statement from them, and they basically denied that this attack makes any sense. And in a previous mail that they sent us, they even said, oh, to do it, you need very strong transmitting stations with 200 meters. So they knew that it's possible, but then they denied it. So, of course, this is not great, but we are ready, if they want, to test it in the real world. And of course, we also thought, what could be the solution to this? And while that protocol is old, there are other ones that are a bit newer. And there is a bunch of them. But specifically one was approved by BSI, and it's pretty modern. It's designed for smart meters already. It's called IMSIS, Intelligentes Messsystem. And we think this could be the alternative. It's currently using LTE for the back channel, so it's already encrypted, but it goes over an encrypted network. In the future, they plan to have a completely independent infrastructure, LTE infrastructure running on 450 megahertz, that will be only for critical infrastructure. So this sounds pretty good. And, okay, we thought there is a solution, and in practice, the company that runs the longwave system also has these devices, so it's perfect. But there's a little bit of an issue with the timing. Basically, this was, let's say, designed in 2017, and it didn't start to be deployed yet, but it will start in January now. Okay, and the other issue is it will take 7 years for this to be deployed. And additionally, there is another issue. In the planning, they put all these super big power plants at the end. So they would only start in 2028, and consider that those are just a couple of hundred of them, and all the others are hundreds of thousands. So what we are saying here is, please review your schedule, start with the big ones first, and then, then you are done 80% of the job, then you can do the rest in how many years you want. So yeah, it's a stimulus for regulators to review the deployment plan and get it done. And here we are closing our presentation. Just to recap, we found out that streetlights are radio controllable in some cities. This sounds good for art installations. They should basically just call us and we can arrange it. And devices are hackable, especially locally with a very simple device. But even worse would be when you hack them, all of them together. If you do so, you can alter the conditions of the grid. You can possibly cause blackouts. There is, however, a system that can fix this. We hope the regulator would make it even faster in deployment. And to all of you, all the security researchers, please look around. There is plenty of legacy systems like this. So please go and find the next one. And one little note to whoever owns those systems, be nice to security researchers. Don't threaten to sue them, because this is really, we are trying to help here, and if you don't help, you might have seen the talk yesterday with the train. It means we will need to come back and, give you some updates.
Then there is just one more thing. So one more thing, playing Doom would be super slow, we have talked about, but I had another game in mind that really begs to be put into the real world, or maybe already is like a virtual representation of this system in the real world. Does anyone want to have a guess what I was thinking about? I heard it.
Really? Oh.
We're doing that. Hello, hello. If not could have their intro twice, you can have that too.
So we are sorry that the video interrupted, but if you want to see it again.
Okay. Oh. Does it work?
Yeah.
Worth the hours of Blender.